The Gauteng ANC elective conference is yet to get underway. This as the provincial executive committee continue to be locked in a meeting, which is understood to, amongst other things, discuss the 19 quarantined votes from Ekurhuleni conference. The elective gathering was meant to kick off this morning, but the PEC and the special NEC sat until the early hours of the morning. Now, for the latest on the story, we cross to our reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, who is following the conference for us. Ziyanda, the latest that we had, well, certainly a few hours ago, was that the conference had not quite begun. Has there been any movement?
No movement whatsoever, other than the fact that delegates of this conference have been trickling in dribs and drabs. And, you know, Hugo, it's unclear then whether or not this conference is still going to sit today, or at least the start of it is going to sit today. You'll recall that the National Executive had a special meeting which ran into the early hours of this morning, where chief amongst the things that were being discussed is this issue of the 5 branches where 19 votes were being quarantined. The NEC has suggested that the conference go ahead and has tasked then the Gauteng provincial executive with making a decision on whether or not these votes should be counted as a part of the final ballot. Now, earlier on, we spoke to a re-elected Ekurhuleni chairperson, Mzwandile Masina, who has also lamented the high levels of securitization at this conference. You recall that David Makura at the Ekurhuleni conference described, you know, the private security there and the guns that were being brandished there as a war zone. And now Masina says the same is unfolding here.
So in all likelihood, this conference could go on beyond the 3 or 4 days that was expected to run.
Yes, that's correct, Hugo. And I want the team to please pull that bite of Mzwandile Masina speaking about the war zone, because it's really also an indication of the levels of tensions that we're seeing playing out at this conference. Let's hopefully the team has now been able to find that bite. I think it's quite critical for us to be able to continue our conversation.
Look, this is a war zone. In fact, Comrade Makura was disingenuous in his articulation about our conference, because there were thugs who had come there to hijack the conference. They brought foreign nationals. They honored our people there. We had to protect our people. This is a war zone. We've never seen so much law enforcement agencies unleashed within the conferences of the African. It was difficult to enter here. It has taken me an hour. This is a war zone. He must explain. He must explain himself what he's trying to do here with the police. We are not going to be intimidated by these law enforcement agencies. We fear no one. We are going to ensure that we vote for Maile. We are not scared of Comrade David Makura and his police.
So certainly when you look then at what's been happening and what's been said, we too as the media have experienced this, and the reason why it becomes critical then is because it brings about this issue about the use of state resources for these conferences. But equally so, Hugo, you know, there are questions about whether or not this conference could potentially collapse. You'll know that Mzwandile Masina forms part of the Adiwele faction, which is basically supporting Lebogang Maile, who will be going toe-to-toe with Panyaza Lesufi for the position of chairperson. So let's listen into what Masina had to say about the prospects then of the conference not going ahead as scheduled.
Not at all. I'm not concerned, because the ANC is a process-based organization, and I believe that the leadership, if was to engage on this particular matter, they will be able to find solution on behalf of the membership. What worries me, though, is that you know, the vacuum that is being left over the past 24 or 28 days is severe to the African National Congress, not to me. Me as a person, I'm the child of the African National Congress. We're here at conference. I'm a branch delegate. Nothing worries me at all.
So, you know, this is the state of play as it stands. Not much communication also coming from the ANC in Gauteng as to the roadmap going forward. We're sort of just been shafted into a media room and, monitoring the entrance of delegates. But the delegates themselves also haven't been told. Earlier on, some of them lamenting how there isn't even like documents, because remember, there's a policy conference coming up in July, that there are no policy documents and ANC bags that are being handed out to them as per the norm when you have a conference such as this one. So we are literally now at the mercy of the Provincial Executive Committee, which is still, since this morning, locked in that meeting to discuss 5 branches and 19 quarantine votes.
Seems to be a bit of an irony to Mzwandile Masina's report, also in conversation with you. On the one hand, he says, he's a child of the ANC and that the leadership will take care of issues. And then he makes these glaring accusations at the outgoing chairman, David Makhura.
Yeah, I mean, that was a bit strange given the fact that, David Makhura is, leaving his post. But the perception that that particular faction has is that David Makhura is in support of Panyaza Lesufi, who is running on a unity and renewal slate that he is leading. And so, which is why then you would have heard him say things like, we're not scared of David Makhura and his police. Now, even that language is problematic because it infers that the law enforcement agencies are acting at the behest of a political principle for a certain faction within the organization, whereas law enforcement agencies are not there to serve the ANC's internal factions. They're there to serve the people of this country. So that comment by Masina also in and of itself can be deemed as problematic.
And I suppose what's also potentially problematic is that we've got these factions at provincial level, if you will. Now, going forward to the December elections, what are the implications of that, Ziyanda?
So one of the things that is also bedeviling the ANC is the fact that because most of the leaders of the organization, all they're really thinking about is that December elective conference, easy is the decisions which should ordinarily be easy, such as discussing, you have an NEC sitting for hours just to discuss 5 branches, Hugo, 19 quarantine votes, just 19. You have the national executive seized with that for a marathon meeting. And still, even in the outcome of that discussion, all that came out was to say they're giving the green light for this conference, but Gauteng must again start the conversation on whether or not this conference should go ahead and whether the status of those votes. You see, this speaks to just how factionalized this organization is, that it can't take simple decisions as per the constitution of the ANC. There's this roundabout way of going to the NEC pushing it back to the PEC, and the PEC now actually is in a tense meeting just to discuss 19 votes, and the status thereof is really, I think we can say after waiting for so long, it's quite ridiculous when you think about the fact that it's also coming a month after the Ekurhuleni conference. So in between now and the last 28 days and the start of this conference, there was a task team that was led by Jeff Radebe to look into these 19 quarantine votes. Why then was a decision made to continue if they knew or could preempt that this could potentially become a problem? So this is in and of itself indicative of the state of the organization.
Ziyanda, I suppose my final question has got to be, is this a party in disarray? When we throw into the pot, if you will, the ANC Youth League and the Women's League?
Everything I've just told you now, Hugo, displays a party that's in disarray. In fact, one of the other issues then that the NEC looked at was the status of the Women's League. You'll recall that earlier this year they were disbanded. So, it's a non-question really whether or not it's in disarray. The real question here is who will be tasked then with being able to lift this party out of the state that it finds itself in, which is also why this conference just in terms of how critical it is, it has to look even beyond who becomes chairperson. It's got to do with more how the organization as a whole, led by, of course, a specific chairperson, will be able to claw back the continued decline in electoral losses, as it were, since the 2016 local government elections.
And that ANC conference scheduled to have started this morning hasn't quite started. Will it happen? Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you so much for that update. We will come back to you as the afternoon progresses.